All right, welcome to Comfortably Uncomfortable. You've got Sandy and Alex here, and we are here to empower women to choose courage over comfort by getting comfortably uncomfortable. We get real and cut through the bullshit. Are you ready to get a little weird? Because we're going to laugh, sweat, cry, and grow together.
No topic is going to be TMI. Well, maybe for me, but not for Sandy. We complement each other in that way. Okay, so are we ready?
Well, yeah, duh, I am, but are you?
Okay, let's go. The one with the boundaries.
All the boundaries. What is a boundary? Like, I hear that word a lot, especially now with just, dealing with my divorce and like clients and, like, it's just an interesting word of like, you hear it of like, do you have boundaries? Have you set boundaries? Or like, even with kids, like boundaries with kids, like, but I haven't really sat down to be like, oh, this is my definition.
What are my boundaries?
Yeah. Or like, what's my definition of a boundary? Because I think mine might be different than yours.
I'm sure.
So like, what is a boundary to you?
And I feel like it's very internal too. It's like,
oh, totally.
Because everyone's are going to be completely different, and boundaries, with different people or even with the same person, but in a different situation. Like, outside the house, inside the house, whatever. I think when we first started thinking about this topic, we were talking about client coach boundaries.
Oh, that's
and now,
right. Yep,
okay. So I was thinking about this more because I said when I was working out, I overheard this client coach conversation, but it was very much the coach, like just spilling her guts to the client. Okay. And to me, it was completely inappropriate. Like should not be the way.
Yeah. Like it's not a therapy session of the coach to just be like, hey, here's all my shit going on. Okay.
However, I think if the roles were reversed and it was a client dishing to the coach, I don't think it would have been so bad.
Yeah.
And because I think that there's so much that can affect physical performance or, your mental ability to push on any given day. And, things that are weighing heavily on you, like this intensely personal topic they were talking about.
I'm like, what were they talking about? No,
I know.
But like, yeah, like it could be a release of being like, oh, I got it out. And like, it's not that you need therapy right now in that moment, but just like, oh, I just needed to vent or I needed to just share. And then like you can move through. Okay.
But do you agree? Like, do you think that there should be different boundaries for each of those people?
Okay. So for me, as I was thinking about this, of like the simple definition of a boundary is a dividing line, right? Like I'm going super simple of like, it's a dividing line.
Yeah.
Now from there, when we talk about relationships with people, I'm a connector, right? I like to connect with people.
Yeah.
So to me, a boundary is like how emotionally close you let people get to you or like let you in. So I think my boundaries, like you said, is it depends. It's gray.
Right.
It's not black and white. It's very like what I have that's black and white with my clients is like scope of practice. So like I have therapists on speed dial of like, if our conversation's getting to a place where you're seeking advice or you're disclosing something that is of serious matter, i.e. like self-harm or something that's really hard, I have a strict boundary of like, hey, this is out of my scope of practice, but I'd love to get support for you. Now, in that gray area of both ways, like when I was going through my divorce, I was still working and I was still client facing. And I have some clients that just like, they could tell like on my face or the way I held, and they would like push me to be like, no, Sandy, like, I want to know, like, I want to know what's going on with you, what's happening. And it's that way of connecting. So maybe it was, and I bet you some of my clients are listening right now and be like, oh, I'm one of them,
Yeah.
And like, I think it would just come from them too, of like how much they want to like allow me to get close to them.
Yeah.
but I joke and say, like, if you become a client of mine, hi, Alex, we're still connected. Like, you become a friend. Like, you become somebody that is in my circle of trust. Like, because I'm one that, like, I have strict boundaries in the sense of, if we don't connect, I probably won't take you on as a client, because that's just not how I run things.
Well, I think openness and honesty, like comfort, that's different to me. You know, like what you're saying is like, you want to be authentic and you want someone to know you. And, you know, like I'm thinking, you know, I train with a lot of moms, and, you know, we're moms. So like, we have to be open and honest. Like if there's something going on and we just can't make it work that day, you know, I think we need to be like sharing part of our personal lives with the clients. But I also think that's different than,
well, what I'm hearing you say of like the example you had was like, I definitely like had moments where I was like, oh man, like I could go on and vent, or like, oh my gosh, this happened the other day, blah, 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 blah. And I usually tell, like, the way I would have handled that situation that you witnessed is I would have been like, oh my gosh, like, I so want to share all this with you, but this isn't the time. Like, here's my boundary of like, can we grab a coffee or drink or meet up at the playground some other time? And like, yes, I want to share. Do you want to hear? Yes. But like, what's our intention and goal right here, right now in this moment? And I think that like translates to like boundaries with all the things. I'm surprised I haven't said all the things more times.
All the things.
Like, you know, dating, for example, like being divorced and then dating, and people all, you know, are all over the place. Of like, especially if you have a kid, of like, how quickly do you introduce the child to the person you're dating? And like,
that's an interesting
physicality,
boundary.
like when do you get physical? And like, there's many ways of how you guide your boundaries, right? Whether it's faith, whether it's morality, whether it's growing, you know, role modeling how you grew up. But I think, again, it's like, you have to know what your boundaries and the why. Oh my gosh, here we go. We're back to the why.
Back to the why
behind those boundaries.
Yes.
And that,
I agree.
I think then translates, you know, it's like a domino effect of like, then translates to like boundaries with like social media, or boundaries with, you know, food or activity or your phone, you know? And so I don't know, I hear this word boundary all the time. And I feel like we have this just very vague kind of like, it's out there, but I get why it's vague, because no one can really tell you your own boundaries, because your boundaries, right, Alex, are going to be different than mine. Like maybe you aren't affected by social media as much as I am. Right. So like I might have to like put my phone on silent or lock myself out after a certain time. Yes, I do that. Like no joke. My phone goes
I think
on
that's a good policy. Oh yeah, I know. My do not disturb goes on at 8:05.
I love the 8:05. You had to give yourself 5 more minutes.
I am like, I know. It's like my alarm in the morning. It goes off at 5:09. I don't know why.
You know
it
what?
just feels better
things
than
about
5.
you that I just love, and it's okay. Like that's who you are. I love it. Yeah, like I have friends who tell me, you know, that they won't put Instagram on their phone. And so like if they want to get into the Instagram app, they have to re-download it, re-log in. And like I overheard some people like, oh my gosh, I'm being like so mean about it. And I'm like, who gives a shit? Like if that works for them, right. Let them be like that. To me, I start getting heated of like, why are we judging other people's boundaries? Like that's the real comfortably uncomfortable conversation here. Is like, can we just not respect each other's boundaries? Like why is a boundary so needed to be like a thing if you don't agree with it? Like maybe that boundary doesn't work for you. Fine. But let them be.
But it doesn't have to be yours. Yeah.
Especially if it doesn't affect you, right? Like if it doesn't affect you, why? Like, why do you care?
I'm thinking too, like I feel like this podcast has really tested my boundaries.
Oh, tell me more.
You know, but just like all the uncomfortable topics. But
okay.
I think that, you know, because that would have been more of a boundary for me, I think a year ago, like, discussing personal topics.
Right. But like you came to a point in saying, hey, I now feel comfortable doing that, or it's not necessarily a boundary for me, or maybe you just readjust it, right? Again, it's not black and white. It's a continuum of like just adjusting. And I think boundaries are constantly adjusted, right? Like unhealthy boundaries with people, with friends, with parents, with in-laws, with exes,
food and exercise.
Like, well, I mean, sure, but
yourself and all that. Yeah.
Like it's going to be constantly just shifting. And I think that's the thing, is we live in and this is going to be another episode of ours, of like, we live so much in this all or nothing extreme that we don't realize that it's going to shift, right? It's going to potentially change. Maybe somebody broke your trust and you're going to have to shift that boundary or adjust that boundary, either until trust is restored or forevermore. It's like, oh, maybe I learned that that's not what I want to be able to emotionally let myself get close to that person, or that those topics aren't discussed, like trying to think. Like, well, I think this round. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I'm thinking about family, and I was having this conversation actually recently with my therapist, because she's saying, like, how do you, I don't know if we actually use the word boundaries, but like when you think of certain people, like what's like a visualization? Like, is there a connection? Are you like embracing and you hugging, or are you like creating distance? And I like closed my eyes and I was really trying to like visualize. And I do think that, in different situations, whether it's traumatic or not, but like, to your point, the boundaries adjust. Like the fence for me, like when I'm trying to create a boundary, like I just kind of need to make a fence. Like it's sort of like a block. My brain sort of shuts down and I kind of go into like robot mode instead of like feeling the conversation.
Okay.
Sort of like if I'm trying not to be like, I feel like though that's something that I'm doing without realizing it, I guess. And I'm trying to understand that I've created this fence. I've created this boundary, and I'm like not allowing the emotions to like give and take as much.
You kind of shut off.
Does that make sense?
Right? Like you shut down.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Okay.
No, so I think it's also interesting to learn more about your own boundaries, or like evaluate, because I was literally last week that I realized I did that.
Well, I think it's one of those things where it's like we're constantly learning about ourselves and gathering information. I mean, just like our last episode of just gathering information and reflecting. And we so want to be like, oh, I did that, I'm done. Where it's like, no, you can constantly have to gather information and reflect and then choose according to whatever that new information that you gathered, right? And reflected on. So I think boundaries is definitely, like my approach to dating this time around versus being 20 something and no kid, like was completely different. And so I had so many different quote unquote boundaries, and it had nothing to do with my kid. Like ironically, one of the guys that I dated like met my kid because we met in like a social gathering. Now I didn't like include him, we needed time for just us two to kind of connect. Yet, like, technically my daughter already had met him, right? And I put that in little quotation marks.
Right.
Yet, like, the approach to it, and even going like on Bumble and like learning about them, it was like almost freeing, because it was like, oh, well, I'm not only learning about you, but I'm learning about myself getting to know you. And then it's like, oh, I started learning. And it's not like that checklist of like, oh, didn't pass the test, or that's a red flag. It was more of like, how do I feel about this? What do I want to do? And it was really a cool, different approach. And like you said, of having that approach to anything that you do will help you keep going. I mean, food, exercise, recovery from delivery, of just like, it doesn't have to be this hard fence, like you were saying, of like, I'm done with this boundary.
Right.
Because maybe sometimes
it needs to readjust. It does need to readjust over time. Yeah.
Yep. And then it's like on the other end, like now I feel like I'm contradicting myself, but maybe this is why we do this.
Well,
I'm the opposite of you. Of like, I'm constantly like, okay, let me give you a second chance or a third chance or whatever. And so as soon as I was saying that,
so emotionally invested. Yeah.
Yeah. But then there might be some that's like, no, I set my fence. This is my boundary. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
But that was done after gathering so much information and potentially getting the same thing happen over and over and over again.
Right.
So man, we could keep talking about boundaries for
I'm like laughing so hard at this episode because I feel like we just talked in 18 different circles, and we're going to wrap it up with a total question mark. Like, I think it was just a funny conversation that doesn't have any answer or definition, but I think that's the point. That's the point.
I think the answer is you got to keep gathering, reflecting your fence, because you typically default to like, here's my fence and you ain't getting through it. So sometimes you might have to readjust that. There are other times where you have to say, this fence is 20 feet, 80 feet tall and you ain't coming through.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, don't let other people influence your personal boundaries. And then, other people, I don't know why I just said, that was really funny, of like, who cares? Like, if it doesn't affect you, let people have their boundaries and respect. Like, here's one. I'm going to leave this with this one. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. But if somebody is somewhere saying, hey, I don't drink, please don't keep telling them they should buy a drink or like sip on my beer or try this wine. Like, just leave them alone. I think I've said this before in another episode. Like, that's one boundary of like, it doesn't affect you. Like, it doesn't affect you. So let them have that boundary and just leave them be.
Right.
Okay, done. Thanks.
Right.
There you go.
Thanks for that.
Thank you for showing up today. Getting awkward is always more fun with friends. Give us a review, tag us, and share us so we can continue to grow together.
Use hashtag CUPod, letter C, letter U, or tag us. You can find Sandy on Instagram at sweatandshineon and Alex at aj.afterbabyfit on Instagram and afterbabyfit on Facebook and YouTube. We'll see you next time.